I was asked to give an overview of some of the things that are going on in this general area. And you've heard a little bit of the research from Steve, and I'm going to kind of give you a little broader overview. And you're very familiar with this term, crops to the clinic, and I just want to remind everyone this is a legacy of Abraham Lincoln and the land grant system. And indeed, last year we had the 150th anniversary of this wonderful effort that was done actually by the government through investment. In fact, governments can do good things at times, much to the surprise of many in our current Congress. And this investment led to many wonderful universities dedicated to the practical teaching of agriculture, science, and engineering without excluding classical studies, and that comes from the original landmark law. And indeed, many universities, Purdue, OSU, many of across the expanding Midwest at the time benefited. This is one tribute from a painter that in fact is one big panel at Purdue University where my son goes that I took a picture of. And this kind of illustrates the toiling of farmers on the left and the horse-drawn wagon and the state of 1800s agriculture and technology. And then to the right, you see the robed figure representing education, pushing back the dark curtain of ignorance, leading young students through. So this is very much what we're continuing doing today, I hope. And the land grant system was followed soon thereafter by the Hatch Act, which set up the OARDC and allowed us to have these research stations. And we're very proud in Ohio to have such a wonderful component of our university, and many farms that are distributed throughout the state for research. Now, you've heard this before today. There is something very unique here. You can count on one hand the number of places in the nation that have these components on one campus. Many of the universities that have a medical school, the medical school will be somewhere distant. Penn State, they're separated by 60, 70 miles. The University of Illinois by 180 miles. So there's very, very few that have our College of Agriculture, Agricultural Sciences, Medicine, Public Health, Nursing, Dentistry, Vet Med, Dietetics, Human Nutrition, and an NCI designated comprehensive cancer center all on one campus. Very, very rare. Cancer centers, there are only 41 of these officially designated centers in the United States, and we're very, very fortunate to have one on campus. Arthur James was really the one who had the motivation to establish this, and the first James was built about 22, 23 years ago, currently led by Mike Caligiuri, doing a fabulous job and continuing to see this center expand and grow. So what is our strategy on the medical side? And when we think about crops to the clinic and cancer research, we think about dietary patterns. So this is kind of a lot of what Henry was alluding to today, the totality of how we integrate many different components into a healthy pattern, which I truly believe has a significant impact in the realm of cancer. Specific nutrients may be important in various parts of the world, particularly where deficiency syndromes exist. Whole foods, I think, can have a role, and food science processing may have a very important contribution to developing foods that we can use in specific scenarios to help with the cancer process. We include physical activity in here because energy is part of the dietary pattern, and physical activity is a very key flip side of the coin to dietary intake. But most importantly, our greatest ability here at OSU with the resources on campus is to conduct translational research, and that means bench to bedside or crops to the clinic, and even back out into our community setting. Now, when we think about this on the cancer side, it isn't all just about public health and cancer prevention, which of course is part of it. We do want to have guidelines and we do want to have recommendations that over a period of time, years, whether it's like the Mediterranean diet study that was talked about or others that through a period of time can indeed prevent a cancer from occurring. But we have some very interesting other areas of research, and high-risk groups is one that is becoming more prominent. So as we learn more about the causes of cancer and genetic and inherited predisposition, we're going to have high-risk cohorts that we can work with that are very motivated and very much in need to have interventions that will prevent cancer from ever developing, or rather than developing early in life, we can delay this by 10, 20, or 30 years into later in life, and coupled with screening, perhaps still provide cures. Many people present with premalignancy. This week, one of my patients that I follow reminds me of this. He's a young farmer, lives out north of Marysville, who has had his father, grandfather, 4 uncles, and 2 brothers, all with prostate cancer. Now that's high-risk family, folks. And he's 40 years old and has already had a biopsy for elevated PSA with a pre-malignancy, meaning high-grade PIN. But as a young man, really doesn't want all the side effects associated with a surgical removal or treatment. And so he's very, very interested in how he can adjust his lifestyle, eat right, and hopefully prevent this from ever progressing to a cancer. We need to have studies in those high-risk type individuals. There are other people that have high-risk factors, such as former smokers that are high risk of lung cancer, bladder cancer, and at least a dozen other cancers at this time. What can we do for that kind of a cohort with a pre-existing exposure to carcinogens? And then survivors of one cancer who may be at a risk of second malignancy. So a testis cancer survivor as a young man is one of our greatest joys in our clinic, and yet we know that they have a 2- to 3-fold higher risk of developing another type of cancer over their lifetime. So what do we do for those folks to reduce that chance of a bad outcome? Integrative care. How do we incorporate diet, nutrition, lifestyle factors into our ongoing cancer therapy to enhance the outcome? It's stunning how little research has been done there. So evidence-based recommendations, we have almost none. And Henry alluded earlier to how in Colorado, they don't recommend taking antioxidants during cancer therapy. I tend to agree with that, and we don't recommend that during cancer therapy in our clinic. But there's just a remarkable paucity of data with regards to that. Survivorship and a prescription for hope. So when you're done with cancer therapy and you've survived, that's a very teachable moment for many people. When you dodge a bullet like that, it's a time that many people say, well, gee, maybe I ought to think about what I'm going to do for the rest of my life in order to live a healthy survivorship. And so that includes reducing the risk of a recurrence, but also to promote health and longevity in other areas. Many of the cancer treatments put people at risk of other health problems. If you've been on hormone therapy for prostate cancer, you're at risk of losing lean muscle mass. You're at risk of gaining weight. You're at risk of metabolic syndrome, diabetes, high cholesterol, and hypertension. So we need to have programs that include diet, nutrition for survivorship in people that have finished their therapy and are moving on. So what are some of the things that we're doing here at OSU? Here's a partial list of some of the interesting food and nutrition related projects that are underway. I'll show a few of these in greater detail, and I would encourage anyone out there that has some new interesting ideas, come and integrate with people in our Food Innovation Center meetings, integrate with people at CAFRE, and see if we can find some common ground for some shared resource utilization for projects. Let me give you an example, one that came from out of food science, Dr. Vodevotes, Yael Vodevotes, and others collaborating, looking at developing, bringing soy into the American food supply, which has found its way periodically into various foods, but in small amounts, often as hidden ingredients. But really some good soy-based foods that people will choose to consume have not been that common. So here's one focusing on a soy pretzel, and here's a cover of Food and Function. This was a wonderful study that looked at the comparison of satiety, glycemic index, insulin levels in a wheat-derived soy pretzel versus a soy pretzel. And indeed, this showed that those consuming the soy pretzel had much better biomarkers with regards to these issues than the traditional wheat-derived pretzel. So this was really a wonderful project showing how we can get soy into a consumable product. Another one along this line focuses on efforts in cancer to bring soy into novel foods, and Dr. Vodevotes has been working very hard with her group on various iterations of soy bread, and this is indeed a very intense scientific effort. And how do you make the bread optimal in terms of taste and bioavailability of the phytochemicals, and something that people will consume? It goes through this rigorous sensory evaluation, and I know many students have participated in that. We appreciate it. And then when we talk about translational medicine, it isn't always into the clinic. This was a big translation, going from the laboratory bench to making hundreds of loaves of bread for a clinical trial. So thankfully this went to our community with a baker and who very much was interested in this, having a family with a recent cancer history. And modern equipment was a little rough on the bread, and he had to kind of dig down into the archives of the basement of his bakery to find old-fashioned mixing equipment that would actually allow us to produce the bread that had the right kind of texture and rising to be baked in large quantities. And so this is something that not only went right into the clinical trials, but is available already in the marketplace in limited ways. So here's one example of a very initial soy almond bread comparison study that we did in patients. And the soy almond bread, you know, almonds have this is an interesting combination when we think about how can you make a food potentially better. Almond has an enzyme that may make soy isoflavones even more bioavailable. So that's what this study is all about. Will men consume this who are prostate cancer patients? What's the metabolism of the soy isoflavone pattern going to look like? And would the almonds actually impact that pattern in a way that is more favorable? So this was very rapidly accrued. Men were very compliant with the study. I know the first draft of these papers have just landed in my email, and it's up to me to read them and get them back to the authors very soon. We didn't do this study to look at changes in PSA. PSA is a biomarker of these individuals' cancer progression. This is a very heterogeneous group, but interesting, the rate of rise of PSA of people coming into the study was rather brisk. When they were on the study, these two different phases here, separated by a washout, we would actually see dips in the PSA, and then when they were off the study, the rise in PSA then would return back to its high rate. So this is a very, very interesting, not primary, but a secondary observation in the study. And these are all men with very active prostate cancer. This isn't talking about prevention. So this is a full-blown metastatic prostate cancer. Okay. In addition, one of the other wonderful projects, again working with Greg Lisinski over in the medical center, who's looking at how soy impacts the cancer immune system. And indeed, some of the wonderful things that he's finding is that soy will impact how our immune system interacts with the prostate cancer, and has just successfully had a wonderful score that should be a fundable NIH R01 should Congress get back in gear and fund the National Institutes of Health at some point to really look at this in great detail. So we're very, very enthused about moving forward with soy-based foods with regards to cancer prevention and supportive care. Bioactive lipids are very interesting. Lisa Yee particularly has been working on this with Martha Belluri and others. Omega-3 fatty acids, one of the focus of this work. And indeed, when we think about this, we've made some very, very interesting findings that omega-3 particularly will impact one of the subtypes of breast cancer that is particularly worrisome in women, this very aggressive HER2 subtype that is a very difficult one to treat. And indeed, Lisa also completed a wonderful study showing the very first dose-dependent impact of omega-3 supplementation on breast adipose tissue fatty acid composition. This is being followed by a study that was just finished at the Stephanie Spielman Comprehensive Breast Center, where Lisa actually went the next step into foods, where we've received both salmon and tuna from the national fisheries in the United States, and have conducted a study in high-risk women comparing supplements to consuming the whole food product with regards to fatty acids in serum and breast tissue, and indeed the fish will also increase the omega-3 fatty acid patterns appropriately in the blood and the tissues. We're very interested in a variety of different plant materials within vegetables. Cruciferous vegetables are of interest, and one of the things we focused on very much, and of course our new Pope is very interested in this as well, and he was very intrigued when they were all sitting in the Sistine Chapel voting a few months ago to see that after they cleaned the ceiling recently, that there was actually broccoli there being passed. But anyway, we've taken up this cause here at OSU, and indeed with wonderful teamwork between the medical center, Amir Mortazvi in medical oncology, Dr. Schwartz in his lab, and Mike Freitas, who runs the proteomics center. We're making some very, very interesting findings with regard to the ability of broccoli and cruciferous vegetable components to inhibit bladder carcinogenesis. And indeed, we're finding that bladder cancer is very sensitive in the laboratory. This is a very important malignancy, even though it's only about the sixth most common. It's the most expensive one to treat right at the moment, and it's rising globally because of the tobacco epidemic, and cruciferous vegetables look like a good direction for our research. And the research that's gone on here includes human epidemiologic studies suggesting that two to three servings a week will reduce the risk. We've identified here the various bioactive components that are potentially meeting this effect, demonstrated the inhibition in animal models, move forward with mechanisms of action. And what's very interesting about the cruciferous vegetables is the ability to impact the epigenetic modifications that contribute to the etiology of this tumor. So we'd love to see not just a V8 juice in a clinical trial for bladder cancer, but we want to make a V8 juice type product that has multiple bioactives and phytochemicals that may be able to enhance the ability of any one component to inhibit bladder cancer, but something that would really bring a multitude. So this is one area where we think a food could specifically be targeted for high-risk individuals for bladder cancer and may have some benefit. You heard a little bit about the tomatoes. I'll go through this kind of briefly. And again, it began with this wonderful epidemiologic observation. And again, to me, if an epi study can pick this up, I bet the real effect is even stronger. And the fact that out of all the fruits and vegetables that were examined in the health professional study, the fact that tomato sauce and pizza were the only ones that were related to a lower risk was very intriguing to us. And very quickly, Dr. Schwartz and colleagues began to identify different components of tomatoes that we thought were important. And over the years, many, many accomplishments here at OSU have shown that tomato products and some of the pure compounds from tomatoes will inhibit prostate cancer in animal models. We've learned a great deal about the absorption and distribution of these various phytochemicals in humans, and a number of studies underway that will better help us understand how tomatoes may inhibit prostate carcinogenesis and how we may be able to make tomato-based food products that are relevant to clinical outcomes. And one of the directions, of course, is combining foods into a new food product. We talked about the soy and the almond bread. Well, the soy juice, the soy tomato juice is in clinical trial, published already with Torsten Bohn, a postdoc who was here for compliance, and in collaboration with Dave Francis, Yael Vodovot, Steve Schwartz, and a number of other folks, we have been able to go from picking a high lycopene variety of tomatoes, using our plant genetics to help us better understand which variety of tomatoes may be best for our food product, isolating components from soybeans, and coming up and testing. And again, it took a couple of years, believe me. The first few, I wouldn't say I could drink a whole glass of that when we first started, but when this first started, this didn't taste very good, in fact. It was more like putting chalk into tomato juice. But after a couple of years, food science did their tricks, and we had a product that really tastes good and had outstanding compliance in a human study. But while we're doing human studies, we're also working in mice, and I think animal models have an enormous amount to tell us. And what we haven't been doing with our epi and our animal models is really kind of asking parallel questions. And I think many of the reasons the animal studies and the human studies are not congruent is because we actually are doing bad epidemiology. And I think a good example of that is that we lump all breast cancer together. We know breast cancer is a family of diseases. The same thing with prostate cancer. It's not one disease, but it's a family or a collection of different diseases. And some are going to respond to foods in different ways. So we have an enormous amount to do to improve the quality of our epidemiologic research. And I'm not going to bore you with a lot of data on this. I just want to highlight a couple things. We fed mice that get prostate cancer a regular nutrient-replete diet, one that had whole tomatoes that were freeze-dried, one that had some soy germ, and then a diet that had both. And if you look at the prostate cancer incidence here, we went from 100% to 61 with tomato. With soy, it was 66, down to 45 when you put them together. So this was a remarkable finding in what I consider a very aggressive model, and indeed suggests that working with whole foods rather than taking a pure chemical from a food can give us a very positive outcome. So the future is that we're going to move forward with improving our product and bring more of this into the clinical program here at OSU. Many people at OSU are working with spices and some of their component parts. Curcumin from turmeric is one that's very, very interesting and being looked at in various ways at OSU, particularly with regards how to enhance absorption and bioactivity. A number of fruit-based studies, particularly black raspberries and strawberries at OSU. A special thanks when we look at this, out to our farmers that are in Ohio. Dale Stokes, his family, and the Stokes Farm have been providing black raspberries for research for a number of years. And initially, the crude way of doing this before food science got involved was, oh, well, let's just freeze dry it and feed this to people. Kind of looked like this in a plastic cup and see if you can get it down. Well, the mice did very good with this. They just love the stuff, and indeed, when you look at colon cancer risk in the mice, it dropped very dramatically when you add black raspberry components to the study. We know from our nutrient and phytochemical analytic core what are some of the bioactives we're interested in black raspberries. Many of them look like this, but it isn't just one compound, it's many, and this is why we think working with whole foods is really one of the most important directions for us. And Joe Sheerans up in Worcester has just done an amazing study, I think, looking at different varieties of the black raspberry. So again, we're looking at the biologic diversity, but also how different parts in the state, the soil conditions, the weather, the sun, the rain, all influence the constituents of these black raspberries. And then they also looked at different stages of ripening. And then we're able to make extracts from these and test them on colon cancer cells for bioactivity and really begin to understand the complexity when we get into trying to define, well, which black raspberries or which varieties should we be using under what conditions to make our optimal food products. And I have to say, one of the stunning papers that came out last year came from Tong Chen in our medicine program, where she did a clinical trial on esophageal premalignancy in China. So China is an area where they have a lot of esophageal cancer, and they screen for this aggressively. And if you have a early dysplasia, these folks are watched very, very closely for the development of cancer. Interestingly, they're very interested in this food product. Here's the head of the hospital there smoking a cigarette. So maybe he's thinking that he needs a lot of strawberries as well. So here's some studies from that trial, again with just plain freeze-dried black strawberries. And this was reported last year, showing that the dysplasia was dramatically reduced in a matter of a few months, and indeed the proliferative index in those lesions dropped rather substantially, and some of the biomarkers related to progression. So this is really an outstanding step forward for this disease. So here in food science, we've gone another step again with Dr. Vodevotes, her lab, and others in making black raspberries into a wonderful nectar that we can use. This is in clinical trial now here, and also some confections, more like jelly or gummy type confections. And let me tell you, when you get a little white chocolate on the top of those are fantastic. So, we think we'll have outstanding compliance with these studies. And again, a special thanks to our students who come to the clinical centers and actually participate in these trials. Here, Chris Weghorst over in the School of Public Health is collaborating on a number of studies, particularly focusing on oral cancer. And indeed, they've done studies in cells, in hamsters, models of oral carcinogenesis, and developing different types of delivery vehicles that you see here. Initially kind of a cough drop-like material, gummies, solid, more like solid candies, and then again, we've had some of these gummies that are coated that are being tested in various clinical trials right now. Chris and colleagues have written a paper recently where, using black raspberries, they're looking at various molecular biomarkers of oral carcinogenesis, and there'll be a series of papers kind of coming out using, modern transcriptional profiling to help us understand exactly what are the genes and the mechanisms whereby these foods may act. And again, it comes full circle all the way back. Ohio's a good state for black raspberry production, and interestingly, Dale has been promoting that in the state, and indeed, black raspberries will grow in some of the same areas under the same conditions as tobacco. So this could easily become a substitute for tobacco in certain areas, which would have an added benefit. I'm going to end with a couple comments on international global nutrition. Colleen Spies, Chris Taylor over in Allied Health, and one of the things that Henry mentioned earlier is that the American Institute for Cancer Research and has guidelines for nutrition and cancer prevention that are evidence-based, looking at all the data that's been published over decades, and they're kind of listed here in a very cryptic way, you know, maintain a good body mass index, reduced obesity, limited whole sugar or sweetened beverage intake. We need greater vegetable and fruit and whole grain intake, limited alcohol intake, limited sodium intake. And using NHANES data in the United States for over a decade, you know, Chris and Colleen have shown that America's report card with regards to these recommendations is pretty bad. With regards to the weight, you know, between 25 and 40% are not having trouble with this guideline or not meeting this guideline. Limited sugar intake here, about 15 to 40% are not meeting that guideline. One of the sad parts about the sugar one is that the younger people, the younger cohorts are not meeting the guideline as well as even the older ones, so this is not a good sign for the future. Vegetable intake, fruit intake, and it's just quite remarkable. Whole grain, high fiber food intake in the United States is met by less than 5% of Americans. The one thing they're doing, which might surprise you, given the amount of living in a Big Ten town with tailgating, is that actually 80% of people meet the guidelines of limited alcohol intake. Limited sodium intake, you know, about 30% are meeting the guidelines. So even with the data we know today, if you would meet these guidelines, I think it would have a very dramatic impact on the overall risk of cancer over a lifetime. But we are doing very, very poorly as a nation, suggesting we have some important work to do in bringing this to the community. So again, you know, channeling change here at OSU. We've got wonderful resources on campus, wonderful intellectual capital. We're hoping that some of the new themes are going to feed into this by additional recruitment, but also providing resources for people to work together, collaborate, and do the cutting-edge research that's necessary. So again, it's all about research, education, patient care, fundraising, I'll say a couple words, and enhancing the reputation of the James OSU nationally and globally. You know, when it comes to reputation, this surprised me one day. I was at a meeting in Florida and someone opened up the Wall Street Journal and there was a full-page ad saying, talking about this crops to the clinic research here at OSU. So that was quite striking. So enhancing the reputation, again, put another plug in for Pelotonia. It's a great event. It'll really move you to participate in this if you so choose to do so. But if you don't want to ride in it, open up your wallets and donate money to the Crops to the Clinic team. So we need it. Many thanks to our Secretary of Agriculture for visiting last year a couple times to help us kind of open up the Growing the Cure fundraising effort. We really appreciate that. And this could be, if you see the trucks out there from the farm co-ops and farmers that are participating in Growing the Cure, give them our thanks. It's really appreciated. And another great thanks to the college for helping us with the Cancer Survivors Garden, which is being done right over here off of Lane Avenue. And we're going to have a wonderful program this year, and we hope next year to have an NIH grant submitted focusing on this Cancer Survivors Garden. So it would be an education program with real, true biomarker outcomes over the year. And with that, we'll end, and thank you very much.